Get ready to rumble. Shilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Shilling.
Welcome to the Shilling Show Unleashed podcast. Remember, your direct support makes our show possible, and you can directly support this podcast by visiting shillingshow.com and then clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page to make a monthly contribution. We appreciate your support. We appear to be a nation with far too much time on our hands, and when a nation or a people has too much time on their hands, trouble invariably follows. I'm talking today about the issue of gender identity, transgenderism, and all of the related topics. And I want to start first with a post that was made in the student newspaper. And boy, have those come a long way since I was a kid and had a student newspaper at my school. But this one's at Henley Middle School in good old Albemarle County. This is a quote from the author. "Identity is a hard thing to figure out, and many teens are left confused about gender and sexuality. But I'm here to give you a helping hand and list some of the sexualities and their definitions." They go on to talk about heterosexuals, homosexuals, bisexuals, asexuals, and pansexuals. No preference for gender. It's just a lot more personality-based. What are they talking about here? Why is this in a student newspaper in Albemarle County government schools? Why do we need a helping hand from a teenager to figure out gender identity? And if you want to know why teens are confused, it's because they're being presented with a bunch of anti-scientific nonsense, and they have far too much time on their hands. The author goes on to tell us that there are many different sexualities, and these are only a few of them. And if you don't feel like you fit into any of the things that were listed above, you might want to learn more, and they direct you to places on the internet which are full of all sorts of additional nonsense and absolutely vile content. Now, there's a very interesting admission in this piece here, which I think is pertinent and germane to the entire topic and what follows this discovery of sexual identity. Here's the quote. "Middle school is early in our lives, and you will likely change a lot by the time you're an adult. You don't need to stick with the label that you use today. You can change and develop. So can your sexuality." Now, the reason that is so very important is that many people are making life-changing decisions at a very young age, deciding to permanently alter, either chemically or surgically, their sexuality, their gender. So if you're in middle school and you realize that you might change a lot by the time you're an adult, why would you do such a thing? This astute middle school writer goes on to tell us that sometimes people are born into a body that they don't belong in, and whether they're born into a female body but are actually a boy, or they're born a boy but don't feel they fit with either binary gender, they are all very real and valid. If someone requests that you refer to them with a different name or new pronouns, please honor their request to do so. And then there's a whole explanation about pronouns, he, him, they, them. Yes, I just can't stand calling somebody a person, an individual, they, and yet that is being done in mainstream journalism today. Cisgender, transgender, non-binary, gender fluid, and it goes on and on. The article concludes by telling us that at Henley Middle School in good old Albemarle County, there is a Gender Sexuality Alliance, an amazing group of students and teachers who create a safe space for discussion of issues surrounding the LGBTQIA+ in our school. What has become of America? There is one bright spot across the entire country, and that is Arkansas. And they recently passed what is called the Save Adolescents from Experimentation, or the SAFE Act. And this is experimentation. It's totally non-scientific. It is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. The GOP overwhelmingly passed this in the House and Senate in Arkansas. And surprisingly, at least to some, it was vetoed by whom I would classify as a rhino governor, Asa Hutchinson. I don't know what was on his mind, but the veto was overridden. I went to do some research online on the topic, and I saw that practically every story from the mainstream media referred to this story negatively, the story of the GOP overriding the veto and protecting children, instead saying they were harming children who needed to receive gender-affirming care. Mind you, we're talking about bodily mutilation, chemical castration through puberty-blocking drugs, what they call cross-sex hormones, and surgeries that can never be reversed. And looking at all of this, I say again, we're a nation with far too much time on our hands. We're suffering because of the mindlessness of adults who allow this and children who are pursuing it. Thank God for Arkansas. Thank God for courage. And we need to pray for the United States of America. We're on a very bad path. The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast continues in a moment.
Associated Press award-winning journalist Rob Schilling.
BorderHawk.News is a one-stop shop with the latest news about immigration nationalism and globalism. The BorderHawk staff daily curates immigration news stories and, in the fashion of the Drudge Report, updates the site with cutting-edge content and original first-class commentary. BorderHawk.News highlights national and international media reports, tweets, and nuggets buried in local news blurbs, polls, video clips, and policy research. BorderHawk is pro-legal immigration, pro-rule of law, but against an unsecure border, as countless Americans have suffered violence at the hands of criminal illegal aliens. And an increasing number of Americans are concerned about how mass migration affects their daily life. BorderHawk.News will remain on the forefront of the immigration issue with a buffet of info to read, evaluate, and share. Bookmark BorderHawk.News. Add them on social media at BorderHawkNews on Twitter.
Looking out for us. Rob Schilling.
The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast continues, and we welcome to the program Denise Shick, the director of Help for Families, author of My Daddy's Secret and other books on gender. And Denise, thank you so much for joining us today on this very important subject.
Thank you for having me.
I know you've got a story that kind of underlies all of this, so why don't we start with a brief outline of what your life has been like?
Understanding really what families go through when somebody identifies as being transgender. I was 9 years old when my father had told me that of his desire to become a woman. And with that, there were other very personal details that he had shared. I actually thought, this is Dad's problem. It was not going to impact me, but I was very naive because indeed it did impact me. Even the point of being 9 years old and thinking, who's going to give me away at my wedding? Mm-hmm. Who's going to teach me what to look for in a boyfriend or a husband? But what ended up happening soon after that, by the time I was 11 years old, as I began to question and think, if Dad really was supposed to be a woman, how do you know you're not supposed to be a boy, Denise? And so it was almost as if his gender confusion had flowed over into my life. I was really trying to figure that out, even playing what that role would look like in my bedroom, walking like a man, envisioning myself with a beard and what my life would be like in that role. Well, obviously, that also brought on some confusion with attractions. I always dreamed of being taller and a model. And so I had many, many pictures of female models in my bedroom, and I'd look at those and I think, well, maybe you're gay, Denise, because you actually. So it was just amazing how the different thoughts had come trickling in from my dad's confusion and from the life that he was living behind the scenes. I ended up saving my lunch money by the time I was in high school, babysitting money to buy alcohol to deal with a lot of the pain and conflicts within the family itself, not being safe. My home environment was not safe. My father would begin to wear my clothes. I would start to find them in the oddest places, stashed away. with that, I also discovered that he had a peek hole in the bathroom and that he was watching me. So it didn't seem to matter which room I was in our home. There wasn't any privacy. It was as if my life really didn't exist. It was being absorbed in a sense and not being comfortable and being a girl around my dad as my body started to develop as well. Feeling very uncomfortable with that, understanding that that was exactly what he wanted his body to do. So a long story short, that's kind of it in a snippet.
It's a very difficult situation for, I think, any of us to imagine unless we've been there, and it's so personal, and I thank you for sharing that. I want to go from the micro, which is your personal situation or anyone's personal situation, to the macro, because it has grown to a movement, a transgender movement in America, and I'd like for you to give us some insight on how that happened. How did it go from a personal issue to a national movement?
Well, I think it went from, personal issues. Everybody thought that it was more about tolerance because individuals were basically adults that were coming out and identifying as transgender. All of a sudden, 5-6 years ago, it started to become a in thing for parents to say, I have a transgender child. Whether that child would even be 3 or 4 years old, it became something that was celebrated, and that movement has grown tremendously over the last few years. We now have a lot of children in school that are identifying as opposite sex, and the parents don't have a clue to what's happening. And that was something that I personally had witnessed when there was a school board meeting that I was asked to attend in the state of Illinois. And there were individuals that were very concerned when this was found out that there was a male student, elementary age, that was attending the female bathrooms. And so we started to see a lot of things happening. I think as well, a poster, if we could say poster child or poster person that helped this movement to become very progressive was Bruce Jennings. It almost seemed like with him coming out, things became more acceptable yet, with the idea that people can become the opposite sex than their biological body. So there's been a lot of things behind politicians, the movement, what they call gender mapping, which is to see the hospitals, the treatment centers that are popping up across the world. There's so much money in this that it's just, to me, it's absolutely sickening because it's destroying family lives, but it's destroying the individual's life as well. In the aspect that if they are continuing to need antidepressants, anxiety medications, all of the things that they need for their self-care is constantly fueling somebody's financial status.
I think that's very important information because most people don't see the connection there, but it is a huge industry. You mentioned this targeting of children, and so here in the local library in Charlottesville, Virginia, but over the course of the entire country in the past several years, we've been seeing what are called drag queen story hours. I think, Denise, in previous generations, somebody like that would have been maybe tarred and feathered and dragged out of town and told never to come back. And now they're being embraced even by the parents of these kids.
Yeah, exactly. That is another venue where they have been able to trickle their way in. And so when we've got drag queens that are reading, I've watched some of the videos where they're reading the storybook to the children or they're getting hugs from the children. And I look at the parents and I think, what is the matter here? For parents to actually take their child to this type of event, I don't get it. I really don't get it. I don't know what is so attractive unless you're in this movement and you are feeling that you are a part of something happening in this world and you are showing that you are accepting. But we're talking about grown men, and some of them have had where they are pedophiles and they have that history. And so again, the fact that it can be unsafe for children all the way around. What if you also have a boy or a girl that is gender confused psychologically, and they go to something like this and they think, oh, look, this is all happy. I can be that other person and they're having a good time. This adult's having a good time all dressed up in that pretty dress, and the laughter and the story and just getting tangled in that.
We've got it in the government libraries, as we just discussed with the Drag Queen Story Hour, but Denise Shick, we also have it in the government schools. Not only are they presenting the information to these kids at a very young age, I think they're starting at kindergarten and they like to go down further, but we recently had a story here out of Charlottesville City Schools where there's just full-on promotion of these concepts and mixing it in with other things like race and racial identities and discrimination and so forth, all tied up with sexuality and gender. How do we handle this as far as parents and their kids in the schools?
I don't know as if I have the answer. I think as parents or as grandparents, to stay up to date, really to stay informed on what's going on with this so that your home can be a safe environment to discuss with children appropriate ages of the language of what is being discussed, but where it is at least safe for them to come home and to get the truth and to be able to ask their questions, to give them that safety net. Because the one thing is that if you yourself don't talk about this in your home, they're getting it somewhere else.
And you have written a book that is appropriate for children, particularly for girls. It's called I'm Glad God Made Me a Girl. Denise, tell us about this book.
This book was created with two characters in elementary age where they are best friends and just love and adore each other. And the names are Amy and Susie. Well, one day, Susie shows up at Amy's house announcing that she wants to become a boy with her hair all cut off. And so the book was meant to provide guidance for the child that's going through this type of situation today, and as well as guidance for the parents to walk alongside of their child and to understand the difficulties that they walk in. We've also just recently had released just a few weeks ago, The Boy That Liked Tea Parties, addressing this from a boy's perspective, a boy's journey of liking to do girly things. I think sometimes we're so tied up in what does a girl do? You know, how should a girl dress, or vice versa with a boy? The truth is that many times there are guys that prefer to work in an office and maybe go for pedicures and things of that nature. That doesn't make them any less than a man, but culture would tell us that it would, that surely they must be gay or they are probably gender confused. So let's lean them this way, in a sense. And so that's not the truth. It's like, what is being a girl? It doesn't mean that you're always wearing dresses, or that you do wear a dress, that you always have your hair done. So it was meant to bring confidence for young girls when this issue is hitting around them. And really it is every day. They even see it either on TV, commercials, going to the grocery store. I just wish people would remember to please stay informed on this. Allow your home to be a safe place for children, young teenagers, whatever the age is, just where the family can really talk and present the truth.
I want to talk about parents, since you referenced them in relationship to their children. I'm speaking specifically of young children right now, in that we've seen a deprecation of parental rights across the country, of fathers, mothers sometimes concerned about a child who may be quote-unquote transitioning, and that parent is ordered to stand down by the courts. What's happening with parental rights?
Well, they've been taken away from us. We are losing parental rights. And that had actually happened, in an Ohio couple when their teenage daughter, who identified as a boy, they did not believe in the transitioning being the best option for their child. And because they declined testosterone treatments, they are being abused. They are abusing the child. And so the whole world has just become upside down in this. A parent was always the one that would set the standards and the guidance for their child in their home. And that sadly has been slipping away the last few years.
The other thing I've seen is this push by various states, and I know they tried it here in Virginia. I'm pretty sure they've succeeded in California, to ban therapy that would help gender-confused children. In other words, this is not a topic that can be discussed between a child, his family, and the therapist. Have you heard this?
Yes, I have. And when anybody needs to go to, feels a need for a therapist, or if I had a child that just needed to help unpack why or where has this gender confusion come from. Number one, we have to look at what is going on in our culture, the peer pressure that is out there as well. But what about the individuals that have had some type of trauma? And most individuals that I've known in 18 years of this kind of work have had trauma, some sort of trauma that has happened. And that trauma could be being rejected from the father, but because of their personality makeup and everything else, it's just devastating to them. So to take that right away from parents, but more so from children or anybody that's even of an adult age to say that this is what I want, it's confining everybody in a box and saying this is what you can do and this is what you can't do. We've been losing our freedoms in the United States. And I think that people are just starting to wake up to that.
I think they are. We're talking with Denise Shick, and the topic is gender confusion, particularly with children. Now, we have some present-day issues that have come about here, and I never thought we'd have to talk about this, but we've seen most recently these hormone therapies that are being given to young kids, even what I would call genital mutilation surgery, where they're cutting breasts off of young girls or they're doing other sorts of mutilation. How can we possibly allow this as a society, and is there any pushback, Denise?
Well, there are some pushbacks, that have been going, and we have, like for instance, American Defense Alliance that has been pushing back on several different cases going on, Pacific Justice. So there are legal organizations that are working hard for a pushback, but I think it all really boils down to politics, politicians, lobbyists, and who's got a lot of money to put into somebody's pocket to support one another. It always seems to circle back around to the money. If we look at the pharmaceuticals, the physicians, it's all about the money.
And what are the outcomes for these children who undergo therapies and surgeries? Are they happier afterward?
The individuals that I speak with, and again, these are adults, are not. Now there is starting to get more of a pushback of younger people that had transitioned and now are speaking out. And I love this because most people say, well, that person's older, now they've got regrets. Mm-hmm. And so when you're starting to hear from late teens, more in the early 20s, mid-20s, it's like, yes, bring this on. Let them know where they're actually saying, I had gender confusion. And nobody offered an alternative. Nobody gave me a second option. And one individual, I'm not sure how old the person is. I'm going to say, to me, it looks like between 18 to 20, had said, I'd always gotten everything that I wanted, just shrugged his shoulders like, sadly, this is what he or she, and I'm sorry because I don't know the real biological sex of what the person really is. And so even that person recognizes, I got what I wanted and that really wasn't the best thing for me. And so I love the fact of the younger people coming out and fighting against this for the sake of the children when they're taking hormones at such a young age and the sterilization that happens. But psychologically, what's going to happen with a 5 or a 10-year-old that's transitioning now in, say, 30 years? Where will they be in life emotionally and mentally? And will they be happy? How much higher of a suicide rate do we have to see across this world before we say, wait a minute, we've got 42% that attempt suicide, and you've got threefold of the natural suicide rate where it triples, with those that identify as transgender. So what's going to happen again in, maybe even 10 years, but 20, 30 years old, and this didn't bring them the fulfillment or value that they were looking for, the self-esteem that they needed?
Another issue that we're facing as a society, Denise, is women's sports. And I guess I have to put that in air quotes because if we don't know what a woman is anymore, how could we possibly have women's sports? How are we going to deal with this issue down the line? Because it's starting to cause a lot of problems.
Girls deserve to be able to compete at whatever sport that they're in on a level playing field. And this is not a level playing field when they are allowing males, biological males, to compete in girls' sports. It destroys the fairness in competition, woman against woman, and yet it as well is taking college scholarships away from young girls that have worked hard all their lives, into high school for a college scholarship. And now that opportunity is being taken from them. And I think what needs to happen is that we need legislation that will pass, that will secure girls' rights in sports, that if somebody is biologically of the other sex, they are automatically disqualified for coming in. We don't realize sometimes at the different structure of males, biologically, the bone density, how much stronger they are. Generally, they are faster runners. They can throw more of a distance than girls do. They've already got a heads up on girls in sports. So we really need to start taking legislation and start passing some bills to protect girls and women's sports.
I'd like to talk about the response of the church and what the Bible has to say about all of this, because many people, again, are confused and wonder, are we supposed to just reject people outright? Are we supposed to embrace them and their lifestyles? What is the church's role, and what does God have to say about transgenderism?
Well, the one part is that when we look in the Bible, it doesn't say the word transgenderism as we understand with man lying with male, but it does talk about the roles of male and female, and we know that God created male and female. And so if we start to question that, if anybody starts to question, well, surely, it's almost like the snake coming in. Surely did God really create male and female? There's no third gender. And so if we understand from the very beginning that God created male and female, but we live in a fallen world. And with that fallen world comes a lot of hurt and pain with most individuals, as I had said, that I've known. We've got the peer pressure. There's a lot more that's building up in this. So if we understand they, as in the world, all of us, in this fallen world, are not perfect. But yet if we have somebody that comes into the church in fairness and really, is seeking God and seeking answers in who they are, hurting, that gives us as the church an opportunity to come alongside of them, to become a friend. It doesn't mean that you have to fix them. It's not up to us to fix anybody. That's God's work. But we can come in and be an instrument used by God by standing alongside somebody, becoming a friend and starting to feed into their life in a way of giving them a relationship. Many times they haven't had a healthy male or female relationship. They don't know what it might be like to really be accepted, for instance, for a man to be accepted by male peers, and the same for females. So I think just coming in and being a friend and somebody that cares, somebody that's trusted to listen to them and allow the scriptures to do the changing.
A lot of people look at this issue and say, what's the big deal? If somebody wants to cross over their gender, whether just in dress or chemically or just how they take a social profile, what's the problem with that? From your perspective, where does this lead our society, and what are the problems we'll see down the line?
Well, we see the problem if that's what somebody wants, let them do it. And I think that started out so long ago, and that's what people thought, just let them do it. It'll be okay. And now look where we're at, because that was the attitude that we had. There were marriages that were destroyed, finances where people were brought down, addictions that come with this life many times as well. So the destruction, children that are being forced to call dad or mom, dad, or refer, the dad into a female pronoun or persona. It's absolutely confusing for anybody. To be very honest, I said to somebody recently, I said, I have a hard time keeping up with this anymore. It used to be that you could keep up with it. But as you're saying, we've got the sports, you've got what's going on with the children, what's going on with our laws, how everything is changing is just full of chaos.
What's our hope for the future? I know you've got a ministry, Help for Families. Tell us about that and how people can get help.
Help for Families has been around for a number of years, and it's developed to come alongside of hurting family members that have a loved one that identifies as transgender. to come alongside of them, to pray with them, to meet them right where they're at, to know that they're not being judged for what they're feeling or their circumstances, but understanding the emotional and spiritual pain that many of them are in. Emotionally, they are hurting deeply. And usually shame will keep us from going to anybody in our church or anybody close to us to talk with the situation that we're facing. And so we have many different ways of supporting the family and individuals that help me in this ministry.
Denise, if people want to reach you at Help for Families, how do they do that?
They can do that at helpforfamilies.org or .com, helpforfamilies.org.
And where can they get copies of your books?
Right now on Amazon. And so we're working to translate that over to somewhere else to keep them safe. And I love this children's series. I really think it's important. It's a niche that needs to be in there for these children in today's world.
Indeed it does. Denise Shick, thank you so much for your advocacy for these kids. And thank you for joining us today on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast.
Thank you.
That concludes another edition of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Visit us online at shillingshow.com, where you can directly support this podcast by clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page and making a monthly donation. Your support is essential for the continuation of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Until next time.